Aloha and welcome to this module on Robocode. I think you're going to find this to be the most exciting and interesting module so far in this semester. Maybe the most interesting computer science module you've ever encountered in your entire life. Who knows? We get a lot of good press about this module in the course feedback. In fact, students, when asked what will they remember 10 years from now about ICS software engineering, frequently reply Robocode. So you're going to join that distinguished group, maybe extinguished group, of students who've been exposed to Robocode and have had the pleasure of writing Java code to do battle against each other. And along the way, we're going to use it for some important higher level pedagogical purposes, introducing build systems, quality assurance, and so forth. So there's a lot of generic software engineering stuff we're going to do, but we're going to do it in the context of what I think is pretty fun kind of application domain. So the goals for this module is to continue getting experience using Eclipse. There's a lot more to learn about it. To also start to learn about how it is that you write code that integrates with other library systems, in this case the Robocode library. Obviously, you're going to be writing a bunch more Java code. That's going to help with your chops. And finally, I think that you're going to have fun doing this, and you're going to have fun working with other students and even competing against them as well. So Robocode is essentially a game engine in which you write a single Java class, usually, that extends the robot class. Okay, it's a subclass of the robot class, which provides a bunch of functionality that enables the Robocode game engine to throw up a screen and show robots competing against each other. There's three basic behaviors for a Robocode robot. It can move, it can use its radar to look for other robots on the battlefield, and it can fire its gun, hopefully at other robots, although as you'll see, it's very easy to fire your gun and not do anything at all. You gain points for various things. Not dying is a good way to win points, and also by successfully hitting other robots. And the Robocode game engine comes with a bunch of sample robots that you can fight against, and then later on in a couple weeks we'll have a Robocode tournament where you actually fight against the other robots that were built by other students in the class. So the basic things you need to learn how to do to kind of get going with Robocode is you need to be able to download and install the Robocode package. You need to be able to run a sample match with the sample built-in robots, just so you get a flavor for how things work. And then you have to learn how to use Eclipse to do Robocode development. And there's a couple little things about that. Once you're able to use Eclipse to actually build Robocode robots, then you need to acquire kind of some application domain skills. How do you move a robot? How do you target? How do you fire? And then the very last thing, once you have all of those pieces, is figuring out how to build a robot that can defeat the other robots built by other students in the class. So that's what this module is like in a nutshell. And what I'm going to show you today is the first three pieces. I'm going to go through them quite quickly. The experiential learning assignment A10 will teach you or enable you to learn the basics of robot movement, targeting, and firing. And then the following assignment, which we'll do next week, start on after you complete these katas for Robocode, will be to build a competitive robot that you'll actually use in the tournament. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you some of the documentation, talk a little bit about Robocode. As I do so, you're going to have to spend a couple solid hours just reading in order to kind of get familiar with Robocode. Then I'll show you interactively how you can invoke Robocode from the command line once you've installed it, and then we'll spend a little time showing you how you build an Eclipse project that can run the Robocode system. Okay, so that's all for PowerPoint. Always a pleasure when I'm done with PowerPoint. So the next thing I want to do is bring up the documentation And I wonder, maybe I can make this a little bigger. zoom in. Okay, so hopefully that's easier for you to see on your screen. So this is the Robocode module, and it has a bunch of readings, and I just want to kind of show you, go through these readings a little bit so you have a sense for where you're going to be going when you go. This is the Robocode home page, and the most important, there's not so much you want to do with this page except click the download link, which is how you're going to get the actual Robocode system that you download. There's a, if you click here, okay, and then say java-jar robocode.jar, then you'll install the system. So might be worth just showing you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to say save. Okay, and so then this is in the downloads directory, and so what I think I'll do just for simplicity's sake is I'm going to say cd downloads, and then you're going to see that I've done it before. So there's Robocode 1732 setup.jar. I'm going to say java-jar Robocode setup.jar, and when I run that, it basically creates an installer. Okay, and if I clicked yes right here, it will install it in users Johnson Robocode. I've done this before, so I'm not going to do it again, but I just want to go through the steps to show you that you download this jar file, then you run that jar file, which is running an installer that they've built that will install it, and in users Johnson Robocode, that's, you know, reasonable directory to put it in, and I think it assumes decent things depending upon what environment you're in. Okay, so after we've done that, then you can see that at my top level I have a Robocode and directory, and now what I can do is, if I do ls, you can see that there's various shell commands. In a Unix environment, we can invoke Robocode using .sh. In a Windows environment, there's a what is it called? Robocode.command, I guess, is the one for a Windows environment. Okay, so anyway, we invoke robocode.sh, and this brings up this little window with Robocode, and then we can click the new to start a new battle. That brings up a page with different robots that we can invoke to compete against each other. So we can select a robot like the corners robot, and maybe the crazy robot, and the fire robot. We'll add these three, and then we say start battle. And now we have the battlefield with these three kinds of robots on it, and they're going to run around. And you can check out these various options. You know, we can pause it, we can you know, restart it, we can slow down the action so you can more carefully see how the various robots are interacting, or we can speed things up so they run fast and you get through the particular battle more quickly. So we can go, you know, way up, and eventually somebody's going to win. Okay. So it's important when you first download Robocode, and you run a few different battles as part of a given match. So it's important when you first download Robocode that you bring it up this way from the command line and then run a battle just to make sure that you've installed it correctly and you know that everything's working okay. I don't imagine that you'll have any problems. I did have a problem initially when I tried this because I was running Java 7. So if you're running Java 7, you've got to switch back to Java 6. Otherwise, well, that green robot's pretty crazy. Otherwise, you're going to have problems running the installer. Okay, so Java 6 is important for this. So we'll get rid of Robocode there. So that's how you download and install it. Let's go back to our documentation page. Okay, and the next thing I want to show you is the Wikipedia area for Robocode, which is very extensive and has hundreds of articles in it. And I certainly don't expect you to read all of this. Okay, but there are some, almost anything you'd want to learn about Robocode you can find somewhere in here. And I wanted to show you this top level page, as well as point out some of the more important subpages. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the Wikipedia. Yeah. So this is the Wikipedia page. Okay, which gives just a little overview of the system. I'm sorry. I was confusing this with the actual wiki page for Robocode, which is down here. So that gives a general overview of the system. Then there's also an article on Robocode that was done by IBM called Rock'em Sock'em Robocode. This was done in 2002, so it's almost 10 years old. It's another kind of general overview of the system, and it's a nice thing to read, even though the particulars, how you download and install, that's completely different. But what is good is that it has a very nice overview of the components of the Robocode system and the anatomy of a robot and so forth, and does it very concisely and well. So this is a good article to start with to kind of understand what's going on. The details are going to be different 10 years later, but the high-level concepts are the same. It's also the case that Robocode is a really interesting version or instance of an open source software development project. What happened is that back in the early 2000s, a developer at IBM created the initial version of Robocode and published it, and made it open source so that other people could fool around with it. And IBM sponsored development of Robocode for a little while, but then they just they lost interest and moved on to other things. And there was this community of die-hard Robocode people who didn't want to see the software die, so they moved it over to SourceForge, and they continued development on it. And basically, IBM, is no longer at all involved in the development of Robocode. And in fact, that initial generation of students who helped keep it alive after IBM stopped being interested in it have themselves moved on. Okay, since that time, and there's actually a third generation, or could even be a fourth generation of students now that are enhancing and maintaining the Robocode game engine. So I think this is just a great example of the potential of open source, where you have a community of people who are willing to, are passionate about the system and want to donate their time and energy to keep it going and improve it and extend it in certain ways, and they're just doing a fantastic job. So I'm very happy to show you this system, not only because it's kind of a fun, it's a fun system and is implemented pretty well, but also because it's just an example of what can actually happen with open source software development. So let's go back to the ratings page. Now I'll go to the actual wiki for the Robocode system, and this is the area where the Wikipedia page is just one page. It's not that extensive at all, but this particular Robocode wiki is extremely extensive, has hundreds of articles, and and as I said before, you're not going to read it all, and so what I've tried to do is pick out the pages that are most important to you. There's this Robocode Basics page, which kind of shows you how you start up a new battle, and gives you some additional information there. So that's a good thing to look at to get started. In addition, there is an FAQ page, which is good if you run into problems or are interested in various basic issues about Robocode. There are these set of articles, I won't go through them all, but radar movement and targeting. Okay, and of course, these are the fundamental things you have to do to design a competitive robot. You need to be able to find other robots, you need to be able to move around, and you need to be able to shoot at them. Okay, so you definitely need to read these three articles, and there's there's lots of interesting things you can learn from these pages. Okay, so that's radar. Here's movement. And there are a bunch of advanced articles that I'll get to in a moment that you can look at to learn more about it. And targeting as well. I'll just click on that. Okay, and targeting can get kind of interesting and complicated. Now you're going to find that there's a lot of code out there on Robocode, and you may be tempted to just kind of find Robocode, code out there and make your own Franken robot out of all this kind of stuff that you find. I think it's good to look around at code and try to be inspired at it, but it's very important to me that you understand the code that you submit. First of all, that you attribute the code that you submit. So if you're using somebody else's code, you better be darn sure to indicate that. And if your robot that you submit does not contain any code that you actually wrote, that will reflect poorly on you and on your grade. Okay, because this is not about just winning. This is about actually learning Java and kind of being stimulated by this application domain to try to do something. Okay. The second thing is that you must understand all the code that you wrote. So even if you have some code in there and you attribute it, but you cannot explain to me how it works and why it works, then your grade will suffer greatly. Okay, and so when I'm looking through the code that's submitted for this assignment, I'm going to be looking for sections where I see complicated code that would require great experience with Robocode to develop. And if I see that, I'm going to call you in and quiz you about that code to see if you actually understand what it is that your robot's doing. If you can't explain it to me, then that will be bad news. Okay, so look at code. Definitely look at code that's written by other people, but develop your own. Develop your own robot using your own ideas about how things should work. It may be a very competitive robot or not such a competitive robot. Doesn't matter. You're not being graded on how well your robot can compete against other robots. Okay, you're going to be graded on things like, does it follow the coding standards? And does it show kind of basic principles of movement, target, and firing. Basic principles is what I'm looking for. Okay, unfortunately, there's no $100,000 a year jobs out there, creating Robocode robots. All right, so you don't really have to become a super expert at this domain, but the process of reading code, reading documentation, experimenting, all of these things are important software engineering skills, and that's why I think this is a really kind of compelling application domain, is because it naturally makes you curious about how you can do better, and there's lots of ways to kind of get feedback about how your system stacks up against other robots. All right, so follow your muse, look at other code to get some ideas, but make sure that the robots you develop really reflect your own capabilities in Robocode development and your own ideas about how to do things. Okay, so there's this page which is very important, which is about how to use the Eclipse IDE. Okay, and I won't go through these pages, but I want you definitely should. I'm going to give you kind of a little guided tour of how it works. But these are pages that you should definitely read. And then there's a whole page on tutorials. Okay, so if you want to do an anti-gravity robot, you can do it there. There's all sorts of kind of stuff. All right. And the last page is if the Robocode involves trigonometry, and if you don't remember trigonometry very well, here's a little page that discusses trigonometry, okay, where you can do things and refresh yourselves on how trigonometry works. There's some more advanced things on Robocode that you can look at. There's a Secrets of the Robocode Master series about very advanced strategies. There's a forum regarding Robocode. I'm hopeful that you won't run into problems with Robocode that would require you to go to the forum. It's very well documented. The system is quite stable. So, in past semesters, no students nor I have needed to go to the forum for help. So I'm hopeful that you won't need to this semester, but I'm giving you a link here just in case. Okay, so that's enough of the documentation. And again, you know, to go through all this documentation and read it and kind of understand, it's probably going to take you a couple hours of work. And what I would recommend is that you oftentimes, you know, you look at documentation as a last resort. You know, you just start fooling around with this system and see how far you can get and select menu items. And then when you run into something, you know, you try to look at the documentation to get you through that thing. I do not recommend that strategy with Robocode, because there is kind of a conceptual framework that you really have to understand, or if you understand it at least partially before you get started, you'll make progress much faster. Okay? Plus, it's good to kind of wait around in the documentation a little bit and kind of see what's out there. So I really recommend that before you write any code, you spend some time reading through these documents and just kind of familiarizing yourself with the general ideas. Even if you don't understand everything at first, you'll at least have seen what's out there, and then you can come back later when you run into a problem and you've got a better sense for where you would look. Okay, so read the documentation. Moral of the story. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Eclipse, and I'm going to actually solve. Oh, you know what I should do before I do that is show you the learning assignment for this week, which is called Robocode Code Katas. I recommend you learn about what a code kata is. It's kind of a cool concept. You can read through this posting to find out about it. And so you're watching the screencast right now, so that's a good thing. You're going to download and install Robocode. You're going to set up a Robocode project in Eclipse. I'm going to go through all that, and then you're going to build 12 simple robots. And I'm going to do the very first robot, position 01, which is the minimal robot, does absolutely nothing at all. I'm going to solve that for you right here, because it's a good way of kind of overviewing how it is that you get Eclipse configured to do Robocode development, which is, you know, a little bit tricky. Not super tricky, but a little bit tricky. So let's do it. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is create a new project, and following the guidelines for this class, I'm going to name it Robocode-PMG, where PMJ is my 3-letter ID that I got from the directory page. And then I'm going to click Finish. And now I've got this Robocode-PMG project. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right-click on that project, and I'm going to go to Properties. And I'm going to go to Libraries, and I'm going to add an external jar. And the jar that I'm going to add is in the Robocode libs directory. And this jar is called robocode.jar. Okay, so there it is. Okay, and that's important because now we can access all of the Robocode classes, such as the robot class, which is important for hooking our piece of code into the Robocode game engine. And actually, now that I think of it, I'm going to do one other thing, which you may not have seen before, which is kind of cool. And that is, in the Robocode jar file, I'm going to double-click on the JavaDoc property. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up this jar file to the JavaDocs that are stored with the distribution. Okay, and what's going to be good about that is that I'm now going to be able to access the JavaDocs for any of the code that I write that's part of the JavaDoc, that's part of the actual robot game engine. We'll see how that works in a second. So now I've got my Robocode PMJ file. I'm going to create a new class, and we're going to call this position 01. And I'm going to type finish. And I'm going to realize that actually I'm in the default package, which is bad, right? We don't want to be in the default package. Part of the Robocode development guidelines is that all of our Robocode robots must be in a package that is named the 3-letter ID associated with the actual developer. My 3-letter ID is PMJ. So what I want to do is actually take this class and I'm going to move it into a PMJ package which I'm about to create. So I'm kind of happy I made this mistake, because you're going to see a way to create packages and move code around to be in it. So I'm going to create a package called PMJ, type finish, and specify that that's the package that I want my position 01 class to be moved into. And there you go. Now I've got a package called PMJ and a position 01. Now, some of you may be saying, what the heck? I was told that the guideline for this class is that all packages must start with edu.hawaii. Okay? And that's absolutely true. But there's another guideline in Elements of Java Style called adhere to the style of the original. Okay? And it turns out that in the Robocode development community, the standard and convention for Robocode robot naming is to have a 3-character package that the Robocode robots are in. And that turns out to make their user interface a little nicer, because if you had these very long package names, it'd be harder to manipulate things. So anyway, we have 2 guidelines. We can't satisfy both of them, and it turns out in this case that adhering to the style of the original overrules the guideline of using, you know, the reverse domain name kind of convention. So that's why we're using PMJ, and that's why when you make your robots, you'll want to use your 3-character ID that's listed on the directory page. Okay, so we've got position 01, and the only thing we need to do to make this robot satisfy our definition is to say extends robot. Okay, isn't that pretty crazy? Of course, we have to do one other thing, is that we have to import robot from the Robocode class to make this work. Okay, and if I now move to the Java doc pane down here, what you can see is, since I've highlighted robot, if I move to the Java doc class, I see the Java docs associated with that Robocode game engine class. Isn't that nifty? Okay, this is a cool trick you can use when you're doing software development in Java with Eclipse, is that if you import a jar file into the build path, then you can open up that jar file, as I did in the project properties, attach basically the file path to the Java docs that are associated with that jar file, and now you've got documentation in the IDE on that library. Sweet. Okay? Okay, so it turns out that this is all the code that's required in order to implement the position 01 robot. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is actually run this robot in a competition against other robots to see how it performs. How do we do that? Well, it turns out in Eclipse, all we have to do is pull down the Run menu, click Run, and because we're extending the robot class, the main program, the main method in that class actually will bring up the Robocode game engine environment. Okay, so we see the game engine environment is brought up, and as before, what we can do is just pull down the battle menu, click New, and see a bunch of robots that we want to battle against. But look, I knew this was going to happen. There are no robots displayed here. Okay, so that's a problem. We can't actually run a battle if we don't have any robots. And this is true because we haven't actually configured the Eclipse environment correctly, okay, for running Robocode. All right, and let me show you how to do that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll kind of exit this, and we'll stop this environment, this execution. What we want to do is we want to select our Robocode project, select the properties, and then under I'm sorry, it's not here. It's not here. What we want to do is we want to select our run configuration, and under arguments, we want to specify the working directory to be the location of Robocode in our environment. Okay, and what basically happens is that when the Robocode when the Robocode system runs, it wants to look in subdirectories of the current working directory to find various files and directories that it uses to initialize itself. And so what we're doing here is we're saying to Eclipse that even though the working directory for our actual position 01 system is somewhere else in the file system, when you run this particular run configuration, set the working directory to the Robocode location. Okay, so having made this change to the argument section of this particular run configuration, we can now type run, and you'll see actually that there was an error that popped up before, which I didn't point out to you, but now there's no error. And we can click new, and now we see all of our sample robots. Okay, so this is great. Now the Robocode game engine can initialize itself correctly and find all of the sample robots that were hidden inside its distribution and set them up in the user interface. Only one problem. That is that you don't see the PMJ robot in here. Okay, so we can continue to battle amongst all the sample robots, but we can't see our particular robot. All right, so let's cancel out of that. And in order, so we've got the sample robots, but we don't have our robot. In order to get Robocode to find our robot, we have to tell Robocode where our robot code actually is. And the way to do that is to pull down the Options menu, select Preferences, Development Options, and we're going to add the path to our Robocode position 01 code, which in our case happens to be in Documents, Workspace, Robocode PMJ bin. Okay? And it'll probably be something very much like that. You'll go to the bin directory of the area in which your actual Robocode Eclipse project is situated. So I'm going to click Finish. Okay, so now that that's set up, I can click New Battle, and there's my position 01. I can type Add. It's got a little star next to it because it turns out that Robocode robots that aren't packaged in a certain way are viewed as like development robots, and our position 01 robot is not packaged for this kind of more formalized distribution, and so therefore it gets the star. That's totally fine. Don't worry about the fact that your robots have a star next to it. We can now go in the sample, and we can maybe add the fire robot, and now we can start the battle, and you can see that the fire robot is just pummeling our position 1 robot. It's a very sad thing, so I'll I will speed things up. Okay, and here you can see it's a very sad thing, the position 01 robot. Okay, it's not good for much except for just realizing, kind of going through the motions of setting up an environment to do actual serious development in. So it's kind of like the hello world of Robocode robots. Okay, so just to review, you're going to bring up Eclipse, you're going to make a project, you're going to change the build path to include robocode.jar. You're going to set up the Java docs so that you can find the Java docs associated with it. You're going to have a run configuration for this. Whoops, sorry. Okay, let me exit. You're going to have a run You're going to pull down the run menu, go to run configurations, and then in the arguments pane, you're going to set up a different working directory so that when you execute this particular run configuration, the Robocode game engine can find its sample robots. Okay, and then finally, in the Robocode environment itself, you're going to click Options, Preferences, Development Options, and then add the path to the class files, actually the package directory and then the class file associated with your Robocode robot so that you can see it in the menu. Okay, so that's your whirlwind tour of Robocode. We'll be working for the next couple of class periods on developing robots, and I hope you enjoy it. Most students do. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'll see you next week.